Welcome to the third episode of The Mist by Stephen King. Hope you'll enjoy. Please subscribe to our channel. From where we stood, we had enough elevation to be able to see almost a quarter of a mile of shoreline, the Bieber property to our left, our own, and Brent Norton's to our right. The huge old pine that had guarded our boat cove had been sheared off halfway up. What was left looked like a brutally sharpened pencil, and the inside of the tree seemed a glistening and defenseless white against the age and weather-darkened outer bark. 100 feet of tree, the old pine's top half lay partly submerged in our shallow cove. It occurred to me that we were very lucky our little star cruiser wasn't sunk underneath it. The week before, it had developed engine trouble, and it was still at Naples Marina, patiently waiting at its turn. On the other side of our little piece of shorefront, the boathouse my father had built, the boathouse that had once housed a 60-foot Chris-craft when the Drayton family's fortunes had been at a higher mark than they were today, lay under another big tree. It was the one that stood on Norton's side of the property line, I saw, that raised the first flush of anger. The tree had been dead for 5 years, and he should have long since had taken it down. Now it was 3/4 of the way down. The wind had swirled shingle from the whole of the tree that had made all over the point of land the boathouse stood on. Billy's description, bashed, was as good as any. Billy was on the rock breakwater, examining the dock that had washed up on the stones. It was painted in jaunty blue and yellow stripes. To the right of the breakwater was a small sandy beach. In 1941, before Pearl Harbor paid off the Great Depression in blood, my dad hired a man to truck in that fine beach sand 6 dump trucks full and to spread it out at a depth that is about nipple high on me, say 5 feet. The workman charged $80 for the job, and the sand has never moved. Just as well you can't put a sandy beach in on your own land now. Now that the sewerage runoff from the booming cottage building industry had killed most of the fish and made the rest of them unsafe to eat, the EPA has forbidden installing sand beaches. They might upset the ecology of the lake, you see, and it is presently against the law for anyone except land developers to do that. I felt Steph go rigid against me, and I saw it myself. The Harrison side of the lake was gone. It had been buried under a line of bright white mist, like a fair weather cloud fallen to earth. The dream before the night occurred, and when Steph asked me what was it, the word that nearly jumped first from my mouth was God.
David?
You couldn't see even a hint of the shoreline over there. But years of looking at Long Lake made me believe that the shoreline wasn't hidden by much, only yards maybe. The edge of the mist was nearly ruler straight.
What is it, Dad?
Billy yelled. He was in the water up to his knees, groping for the soggy flag. Fog bank, I said.
On the lake?
Steph asked doubtfully, and I could see Mrs. Carmody's influence in her. Damn the woman. My own moment of unease was passing. Dreams, after all, are insubstantial things, like mist itself. Sure, you have seen fog on the lake before.
Never like that. That looks more like a cloud.
It is the brightness of the sun. It's the same way clouds look from an airplane when you fly over them.
What would do it? We only get fog in damp weather.
Now, we've got it right now. Harrison does anyway. It's a little leftover from the storm. That's all. 2 fronts meeting. Something along the line.
David, are you sure?
I laughed and hauled my arm around her neck. No, actually I'm mumbling like crazy. If I was sure, I'd be doing the weather on the 6 o'clock news. Go on and make your shopping list. She gave me one more doubtful glance, looked at the fog bank for a moment or two with a flat hand held up to shade her eyes, and then shook her head and walked away. For Billy, the mist had lost its novelty. He had finished the flag and a tangle of lanyard out of the water. We spread it on the lawn to dry. I stood there for a moment, first surveying the damage, then glancing out at the mist again. It seemed closer, but it was very hard to tell for sure. If it was closer, it was defying all the laws of nature because the wind, a very gentle breeze, was against it. That, of course, was patently impossible. It was very, very white. The only thing that I can compare it to would be a fresh fallen snow lying in the dazzling contrast to the deep blue brilliance of the winter sky. But snow reflects hundreds and hundreds of diamonds, points in the sun, and this peculiar fog bank, although bright and clean looking, did not sparkle. In spite of what Steph had said, mist isn't uncommon on clear days. But when there's a lot of it, the suspended moisture always causes a rainbow. But there was no rainbow here. The unease was back, tugging at me. But before it could deepen, I heard a low mechanical sound. What? Followed by barely audible.
Crap.
The mechanical sound was repeated, but this time there was no oath. What? Silence. Then,
You cunt!
I began to grin. Sound carries well out there, and all the buzzing chainsaws were fairly distant. Distant enough for me to recognize the not-so-dulcet tones of my next-door neighbor, the renowned lawyer and lakefront property owner, Brenton Norton. I moved down a little closer to the water, pretending to stroll toward the dock beached on our breakwater. Now I could see Norton. He was in the clearing beside his screened-in porch, standing on a carpet, old pine needles, and dressed in paint-spotted jeans and a white strappy t-shirt. I was gladdened in my heart to see that the yellow birch had fallen across his picnic table and smashed it into two. Norton gave a tremendous yank on the starter cord. I went back around the house, feeling really good for the first time since I got up. My own shaw started on the first tug, and I went to work. At 10 o'clock, there was a tap on my shoulder. It was Billy with a can of beer in one hand and Steph's list on the other. I stuffed the list in my back pocket of my jeans and took the beer, which is not exactly frosty cold but at least cool. I chugged almost half of it at once. Really does a beer taste that good, and tipped the can in salute at Billy. Thanks, champ. I had walked my way up to the big tree. I made my first cut, sawed through, and then turned the saw off for a few moments to let it cool down. The tree was really too big for it, but I thought it would be all right if I didn't rush at all. I wondered if the dirt road leading up to the Kansas road would clear of falls. And as I was wondering, an orange CMP truck lumbered past, probably on its way to the far end of our little road. So that was all right. The road was clear, and the power guys would be here by noon to take care of the lifelines. I had cut a big chunk of the tree, dragged it to the side of the driveway, and tumbled it over the edge. It rolled down a slope and into the underbrush that had crept back since the long ago day when my dad and his brothers, all of them artists, the Draytons, had cleared it away. I wiped sweat off my face with my arm and wished for another beer. One really only sets your mouth. I picked up the chainsaw and thought that the fog bank was coming from the direction of Shaymore. Shaymore was where the Arrowhead project was. That was old Bill's theory about the so-called Black Spring, the Arrowhead project. In the western part of Shaymore, not far from where the town borders on Stoneham, there was a small government preserve surrounded with wire. There were sentries and closed-circuit television cameras, and God knew what else. Also, I had heard, I had never seen it, although the old Shaymore Road runs along the eastern side of the government land for a mile or so. No one for sure knows where the Arrowhead project had came from, and no one could tell you for 100% sure that really was the name of the project, if there was a project. Bill Garsty said there was, but when you asked him how and where he had came for the information, he got vague. His niece, he said, worked for the Continental Phone Company, and she had heard things. It got like that. I drank some beer, set the can down carefully on a rock and got the chainsaw going again. About 20 minutes later, I felt a light tap on my shoulder, turned, expecting to see Billy again. Instead, I saw Brent Norton. I turned off the chainsaw. He didn't look the way Norton usually looks. He looked hot and tired and unhappy, and a little bewildered. "Hi, Brent," I said. Our last words had been hard ones, and I was little unsure how to proceed. I had a funny feeling that he had been standing behind me for the last 5 minutes or so, clearing his throat decorously under the chainsaw's aggressive roar. I hadn't gotten a really good look at him this summer. He had lost weight, but it didn't look good. It should have, because he had been carrying around an extra 20 pounds, but it didn't. His wife had died the previous November. Cancer. Aggie Beaver told Steffi that. Aggie was our resident necrologist. Every neighborhood has one. From the casual way Norton had of raging his wife and belittling her, I would have guessed he would be glad to have her gone. If asked, I might have even been speculated that he'd show up this summer with a girl 20 years younger than he was on his arm, and a silly "my cock has died and gone to heaven" grin on his face. But instead of the silly grin, there was only a new batch of age lines, and the wet had come off in all the wrong places, leaving sags and folds and dewlaps that told their own story. For one passing moment, I wanted only to lead Norton to a patch of sun and set him beside one of the fallen trees with my can of beer in his hand and do a charcoal sketch of him.
"Hi, Dave,"
he said after a long moment of awkward silence. A silence that was made even louder by the absence of chainsaw's racket and roar. He stopped, then blurted,
"That tree! That damn tree! I'm sorry. You were right."
I shrugged. He said,
"Another tree fell on my car."
"I'm sorry to hear that," I began, and then a horrid suspicion dawned. It wasn't the T-Bird, was it?
Yeah, it was.
Norton had a 1960 Thunderbird in mint condition, only 30,000 miles. It was a deep, midnight blue inside and out. He drove it only in summers, and then only rarely. He loved that bird the way some men love electric trains or model ships or target shooting pistols.
How is Stephanie?
He was regaining some old smooth pomposity that I disliked. "Very well, thanks."
And your son?
"Oh, he's fine too."
Glad to hear that.
"Billy and I are going up in the Scout," I said. "Come with us if you want. That is, if you'll give me a hand in dragging the rest of this tree off to one side."
I'll be happy to.
Steph came out, and a moment's surprise passed over her face when she saw who was with me. Norton smiled and his eyes crawled over her tight t-shirt. He hadn't changed that much after all. "He's going to town with Billy and me," I said. "You ready, Brent?"
Give me another beer for the road and I will be.
Steffi's brow creased. She had never approved of the one for the road philosophy or of men who drive with a can of Bud leaning against their crotches. I gave her a bare nod and she shrugged. I didn't want to reopen things with Norton now. She got him a beer.
Thanks.
He said to Steffi, not really thanking her but only mouthing a word. It was the way you thank a waitress in a restaurant. He turned back to me.
Lead on, Macduff.
"Be right with you," I said and went into the living room. Norton followed and exclaimed over the birch, but I wasn't interested in that or in the cost of replacing the window just then. I was looking at the lake through the sliding glass panel that gave on our deck. The breeze had freshened a little and the day had warmed up 5 degrees or so while I was cutting wood. I thought the odd mist we had noticed earlier would surely have broken up. But it didn't. It was closer too, halfway across the lake now.
I noticed that earlier,
said Norton, pontificating.
Some kind of temperature inversion. That's my guess.
I didn't like it. I felt very strongly that I've never seen a mist exactly like this one. Part of it was the unnerving straight edge of its leading front. Nothing in nature is that even. Man is the inventor of straight edges. Part of it was that poor, dazzling whiteness with no variation, but also without the sparkle of moisture. It was only half a mile or so off now, and the contrast between it and the blues of the lake and sky was more striking than ever. We all got in the front seat of the Scout, and I backed out, crunching over a litter of storm-blown twigs. Steph was standing on the cement path which leads to the vegetable patch at the extreme west end of our property. She had a pair of clippers in one gloved hand and the wedding claw in the other. She had put on her old floppy sun hat, and it cast a band of shadow over her face. I tapped the horn twice, lightly, and she raised the hand holding the clippers in answer. We pulled out. I haven't seen my wife since then. Pretty soon we got to town. The North Washateria in the shopping center was closed, it being impossible to run a coin of laundry without electricity. But both the Bridgeton Pharmacy and the Federal Food Supermarket were open. The parking lot was pretty full, and as always, in the middle of the summer, a lot of cars had out-of-the-state plates. Little knots of people stood here and there in the sun, noodling about the storm. Women with women, men with men. I saw Mrs. Camady, she of the stuffed animals and Stumpwater lore. She sailed into the supermarket, decked out in an amazing canary yellow pantsuit. A purse that looked the size of a small Samsonite suitcase was slung over one forearm. Then an idiot on the Yamaha rode past me, missing my front bumper by a few scant inches. He wore a denim jacket, mirrored sunglasses, and no helmet.
Look at the stupid shit.
Norton growled. I circled the parking lot once, looking for a good space. There were none. I was just resigning myself to a long walk from the far end of the lot when I got lucky. A lime green Cadillac, the size of a small cabin cruiser, was easing out of the slot in the rank closet to the market doors. The moment it was gone, I slid into the space. I gave Billy Steph's shopping list. He was 5, he could read printing. Get a card and get started. I want you to give your mother a jingle. Mr. Norton will help you, and I'll be right along. We got out and Billy immediately grabbed Mr. Norton's hand. The two of them went into the market. I strolled over to the payphone, which was on the wall between the drugstore and Notch. A sweltering woman in a purple sunsuit was jogging the cutoff switch up and down. I stood behind her with my hands in my pockets, wondering why I felt so uneasy about Steph, and why the unease should all be wrapped up with that line of white, but the unsparkling fog, the radio station that were off the air, and the Arrowhead Project. The phone lines were down someplace, of course. Some of them were underground, but nowhere near all of them. I tried the phone anyway. The payphones in the area are what Steph calls paranoid payphones. Instead of putting your dime right in, you get a dial tone and to make your call. When someone answers, there's an automatic cutoff. There was no dial tone. I hung up and walked slowly towards the market. I walked up the aisle and went left. I found them in the third aisle, Billy mulling over the ranks of Jell-O packages and instant puddings. Norton was standing directly behind him. He peered at Steph's list. I had to grin a little at his nonplussed expression. I threaded my way down to them, past half-loaded carriages and browsing shoppers. Norton took 2 cans of pie filling down from the top shelf and put them in the cart. "How are you doing?" I asked, and Norton looked around with an unmistakable relief.
We're all right, aren't we, Billy?
Did you talk to Mommy?
No, the phone wasn't working. Those lines are down too, I guess.
Are you worried about her?
No, I said, lying. I was worried, all right, but had no idea why I should be. No, of course not. Are you?
No.
But he was. His face had a pinched look. We should have gone back then, but even then, it might have been too late. Thank you for listening to this 3rd episode of The Mist by Stephen King. Subscribe to the channel and get notifications for our upcoming episodes.